Hi, this is a short video on how to write an essay introduction, how to write an interesting one that draws your reader in. So you want to visualize your intro as this kind of inverted triangle, something where it's a very sort of like broad idea that narrows down to your thesis. Did I say introverted? I've been saying that. It's an inverted triangle. So at the top of the inverted triangle is what is often called the hook. That may be a familiar term for you. Um, Maybe your high school English teachers used hook as a way to talk about that sentence that pulls your reader in. Also, you can call it a lead. That's a more journalistic term, and lead is spelled correctly, but it's what leads you into the story. So it's a sentence version of clickbait. It's what is drawing you in, right? It's thought-provoking, it piques interest. And so a bridge is what takes you from that opening to the thesis. So it's usually, a couple of sentences to start narrowing down. You see how it narrows, right? Narrows down to your thesis, and your thesis statement is that one sentence that states the main idea, and this establishes what the reader should expect from the essay. So this is the guide. This is what tells me what your essay is going to be about. So I want to show you a introduction using the 2016 NBA Finals with the Cleveland Cavs versus the Golden State Warriors. So going into the final game, this is what a majority of the ESPN staff thought in terms of which team was going to win the final game. So you can see, by far, most of the staff thought that the Warriors were going to win versus the three here. And what turned out at that final Game 7 is that the Cleveland Cavs won. Total underdogs, you see the emotion that sort of poured out as a result of this win. Right? So here is an introduction, and this is based from on another article that recapped that game. Cleveland, this is for you, LeBron James bellowed. James and his relentless never count them out Cavaliers pulled off an improbable NBA Finals comeback, and Cleveland is title town at long last. James single-handedly and heroically carried the Cavs to their first championship in franchise history. So let's go over this. So here's the hook. It's a quote, right? Often, a lot of you use quotes. So this is a good one, right? Cleveland, this is for you, LeBron James bellowed. And this is a good quote because it's actually being stated by the subject of this essay, right? LeBron James. So the bridge is talking, it's going to take us from that quote to the thesis. James and his relentless never count them out Cavaliers pulled off an improbable NBA Finals comeback, and Cleveland is title town again at long last. Okay, so then we're going into the thesis. James single-handedly and heroically carried the Cavs to their first championship in franchise history. So what this thesis tells me is that what it's going to discuss in all the paragraphs and what the evidence is all going to point to is how it was really James, this single person. He was the pivotal figure that won this championship. Okay, so that's what we would see from this thesis statement. So the hook, and there are different ways to approach the hook. But first, some don'ts. No, in a world like openings. This is, that voice at movie trailers that has that like, in a world, right? Don't do those long long-winded, very general statements, right? And I've commented on some of your essays that they're like throat clearing. They're really ways for you to get into your essay, but really they're too broad often. Everyone does this thing and reveals a lot about human existence. Okay, so here's my essay about dogs. The thing about those in a world kind of openings is that they start off really super general, and then it's really has nothing to do with the subject of your essay. I am not necessarily a fan of questions that start essays unless it's a really good question. Okay, an interesting, original question, but often they're not. Okay, so have you ever wondered? Did you hear the question I asked? Question mark. Right? They're just really not really pulling the reader in. What it's showing me is like I'm seeing your self-awareness as a writer. It's not really showing me, it's not posing a question that is actually, the function of a question which is inquisitive. It's not showing me curiosity. Secondly, be careful when you use a statistic or a famous quote. Don't just quote Einstein, make sure it isn't a cliche. Quotes have to be really good. It's best when it is really specific to the subject that you're writing about. Don't just go to quotes.com, find a inspirational quote, because it reads like that. It doesn't show me, it shows me how you're trying to get into the essay, but it's not showing me how you're connecting the introduction to the actual point of your essay. So better ways to start an essay: vivid descriptions. Flies hover above the children who are emaciated, save for their bellies swollen with starvation. Right? So this is highly imagistic. It's also a reference to images that we've seen before, commercials that we've seen. So using imagery, vivid descriptions is one way to draw people in. Enhance your sentences with interesting verbs and adjectives. You could use a metaphor or simile. So a metaphor is a comparison, and a simile is a comparison using like or as. So here, single stories are 5 seconds of a 2-hour film, right? So we're using the concept of time, right, as a metaphor, time and film, right? So that's what's being used in this hook. Fightin' words. So this is where you're going controversial. You're trying to really kind of stir the pot. So here's one: the world would be easier if stereotypes were 100% true. Controversial because we know how stereotypes often are used against people, right? Most of the time, we don't think stereotypes are a good reflection of certain identities, right? So, this sentence is intentionally controversial. You could use humor. Humor is super hard. I couldn't even think of an intro that was funny. But definitely humor is one way to draw people in, and if you can do that, kudos to you. Review, for hooks, you want vivid descriptions, use of metaphor, simile, fightin' words, or humor. So for the bridge, you want, again, it's how you transition from the hook to your thesis, and you should stay on topic. Okay, so this is often where I see some faltering. All of a sudden, the introduction is very jumpy. So that happens when your hook is too general. you're trying to narrow it down, and it's a little confusing where you're going, and then you like sort of give me a thesis out of like nowhere, and I don't know how I got to the thesis. Don't summarize the plot. Okay, I often see students do this, so no summary of the plot. Just just think about how you transition telling stories in your own life, right? This is kind of an example, right? There is, you see these two images before and after school. There is something that happened in between, right? So what is that in between that you want to write about? What could have happened, Again, this is where you're drawing on your own skill set that you have. Remember that you know how to tell a story, right? So what's your natural inclination to transition from the hook to the thesis? So the thesis statement, I want opinionated, I want it to be original, and I want it to be deep. Ask yourself, would I want to read this essay? And that's an important question, right? When you write your thesis, look at it and think to yourself, is this interesting enough to keep moving forward? Is it obvious? Are you stating something that 99.9% of the population would agree with? And this is important to me, is it showing me that you're challenging yourself? Okay. Write essays that are interesting for you to read. So sentence stems for thesis statements. In How to Tame a Wild Tongue, Gloria Anzaldúa, right? You have a verb here, and then here is the crux of the thesis. Anzaldúa argues for a rebellion against the continued colonialization of language. Okay. Here is another verb, subverts. Anzaldúa subverts the expectation of an academic essay by employing stylized language, personal narrative, and heightened imagery. Okay. So it's and this is something that could be taken out of the rhetorical précis, right? Where you're examining what a writer is doing and why they're doing it and how they're doing it. Here, Anzaldúa exposes the flaws and traumas of a white supremacist-centered classroom. Okay, exposes, and then what you're going to discuss and show. Okay, so those are some ways to think about introduction, and I encourage you to use these suggestions for your essays.